let us examine the story of the creation of the first humans, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden by God. Let's examine it, right? At what age did you listen to this story? Did you first hear this story? I don't remember, but I think it must be have been that early in life. At my early stage of formation, this story captivated my attention, and I was indoctrinated, I was catechized to believe this story until I begin to have my own mind and do my own research and begin to dissect bits and pieces of this theological dogma. And I found out that most of it is like a fairy tale. Does not make sense. Does not make sense at all. I know many people, especially who subscribe to the three major religions of the world, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, do not even imagine that you can question, you can look into critically some of the allegories in the Bible and challenge the very foundational basis of such teachings. Many people think every sentence, every syntax, every structure, every phrase, every word in the Bible is an absolute truism. And critiquing, criticizing, or examining it is wrong and sinful. And we've seen that even manifest more radically, especially in Islam, when if you question what the Quran has written, you might lose your life. It used to be like that in Christendom as well. Many years ago, people were burnt at stake for just questioning the very foundational base of some of these theological teachings. Because when you understand history, when you understand the movement of history and the theologies around the world, you will know that that teaching, the Genesis teaching as to the origin of man, is but one out of thousands of teachings. So, what made this particular one very popular? First of all, it is documented, it is written down and transmitted to people, right? Many theologies leaning to the origin of man on the planet around the world. It could be secular theologies, it could be mythological explanations, um, are not written down. So they cannot be transmitted to as effectively and as efficiently as the doctrines of the three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. By the way, both Christianity and Islam morphed out of Judaism. They came out of Judaism, right? So it is not sinful because we have been neurologically programmed to believe that questioning the assumptions of the scripture is sin and you're going to hell. And this is a real terror to a lot of people. And this is what mental colonization is. This is what mental conquest is. Our minds have been conquered. We can no longer reason. We can no longer think. We can no longer process informations. And in this context, when somebody tells you that most of the things you believe in the Bible is not true, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, right? Cognitive dissonance. What does it mean? For instance, if you lived your entire life believing that your daddy is your daddy, and one day, let's say you're 30 years old, you're 40 years old, and somebody comes and tells you your mama lied to you, the man you have been believing to be your dad is not your dad, your mama lied to you. How will you react? How will you react to this? You know, it creates that cognitive dissonance. What you believe and something is challenging those belief systems that you have never ever cared to challenge or question. You take it on a face value. And then the person goes on to tell you that I know your mama lied to you that your daddy is not your dad, right? And he said, what do? You get annoyed, you get upset, you think the person is just coming after you for some reason. You rationalize, you intellectualize. But if the person said takes one step forward and say, well, let's do a DNA analysis. Now science is speaking, right? What if you agree to do a scientific analysis, a DNA analysis, right? Is it paternal test? You go and conduct such test, and it comes out that the man you have been believing to be your dad is not your daddy. You see, that is how sometimes trying to examine the content of religious indoctrination, that's how people react. People react um, very belligerent. They look at you with these disdainful eyes. They think something's wrong with you. They think you're possessed by the devil. They think you should not. It's a no-go area. Humans should not question the Bible. The Bible is the word of God, and the final point, right? If this is our disposition, if this is how we view the world, and if our spirituality, for example, is dependent, our whole spiritual concept, our whole belief system is dependent on the factuality of the Genesis story, you're fucked up. You screwed up, because such stories are not a factual story. They are relativist, culturally specific stories of a people according to their own understanding of the planet and the evolution of man. If you analyze the context of the Bible maybe 7,000 years old, right? This planet has been existing for millions of years. And how do you account for such disparities? If the Bible indeed is the word of God, and if the Genesis act of creation, Genesis account of creation of Elohim, and by the way, Elohim is not God. When they translated in the beginning, God created, no, is wrong. You should read in the beginning the gods, because he's talking of group of gods, the Enneads, a collection of, if you may, extraterrestrial entities who, according to the biblical analysis, who decided to create the material realm or the physical realm. And after that, they also created man. But we're trying to see if these events in history, as we have been programmed to believe, is true. We're trying to examine it. Somewhere in the Garden of Eden, people, grown people with intelligence, believe this story literally. That's what fundamentalism is. That's what fanatical adherence is. Because the fundamentalist belief system, you don't have that cognition, you don't have that intellectual power to examine a story you have been told, and you don't even know that you can question such assumptions, right? Because take, for instance, right? We are told Adam and Eve had two children, right? Cain and Abel. And then Cain killed Abel. And the Bible narrator went on to say, and Cain went to a distant land, maybe the land of Nod, and picked a wife. You know, at this point in time, there are only how many people on the planet? 3 people. Where did he get a wife? So it does not make sense. But if your mind is locked, you cannot even see it. You cannot even notice it. You cannot even conceive of such disparity in biblical narration, right? Why? Because, like many people on the planet, from the time you are young, from the time you're very little, your neurons have been programmed. Your central nervous system is programmed that your whole emotions is so interwoven in this story that anyone who brings up any challenge, any critique of your belief systems becomes the enemy, and you react. That reaction is out of impulse from years of neurological programming of your central nervous system. And that is what you call advanced mind programming. Is mental colonization, is theological colonization, is spiritual colonization, is cultural colonization. A people who documented their own idea, their own understanding of the material realm, one out of thousands, right? There are multiple interpretations as to how man came to be. And if you go by the biblical analysis of the creation, as I said, Genesis account maybe 5,000 years old, right? Humanity has been on the planet more than that. More than that. The pyramids, for example, you see in Egypt is older than the Bible. How do you account for that? So, what this is implying is that if we go by biblical account of creation, man or humanity or mankind, or if you may, has been on this planet before the Bible said that God created the world. And that is what we are going to examine today in our today's episode. Stay open-minded. Stay open-minded, especially if you're um, a religious adherent, because this is a hard pill to swallow. The truth is that the fact that you examining the fabricated story, the mythologies, the allegories in the Bible does not take away spirituality, because people are hung up with religion. People are hung up with religion. And religion is nothing but an instrument of traditionalist theological indoctrination. The dogma is meant to dumb down your intellect, to dumb down your intelligence, so that you cannot reason and you cannot ascend to the higher level of spiritual awareness. That's what religion is meant to do, to destroy you from seeking that higher knowledge, that higher level of spirituality. It keeps you at a certain level, certain vibratory level, and that level cannot elevate your consciousness to a higher awareness at all, because that level is a childish level, is a level that believe that um, um, there was actual place in the Middle East called the Garden of Eden, where the first humans were created. There is no evidence to that. And that is what we're trying to examine today. There's no evidence to God creating the first humans in the Garden of Eden. The first humans were not created in the Garden of Eden. Not at all. Not at all. And we are going to explain those things and expose some of these loopholes in the theological and dogmatic indoctrinations that we have received throughout our life. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, if the theological elites, if the doctrinal elites understand that these stories that they are perpetuating from age to age is not an actuality, is not a fact, is not a authentic historical fact, how come they keep perpetuating such stories? Because you need to control the sheep, you need to control the people. If they give you the tool to think, to reason, to understand history, to put things in context, you can no longer go to their quote unquote religious institutions. And those who seek to have power and dominion and domination over the minds of others will have no job. They will have no place. In other words, as Karl Marx say, religion is the opium of the people. I don't subscribe to Marxism or to Karl Marx or communist philosophies, but to some reason, Karl Marx wasn't the known. He understands the world. He understands human psychology. He understands that. And when he said that religion is the opium of the people, he knows what he is saying, because the elite utilizes religion to keep the people docile, quiet, numbed down, brainwashed, controlled, you know? Because the elite, the same people who gave us this doctrinal constructs, don't abide by them most of the time. When you study the history of the evolution of religion, right, the people somehow have to be controlled. And this has always been going on for thousands of years, right? Because they know that a human being by nature, if you have soul, you are naturally spiritual, and they are exploiting these human spiritual tendencies. They exploit it, and they give you a program that has nothing to do with spirituality, with higher consciousness, with higher evolution. And that becomes a prison system for you, right? And many of you think just, once you believe in these theological doctrines, the false theological doctrines, you die, and Muhammad or Jesus or Buddha will take you to heaven, and that is the end of the day. But that's not how things work. You've been conned, you've been deceived, you've been led astray, in a collectivist religious system. And for you to be free means that you have to begin to think independent of the religious establishment, of the traditionalist religious establishment. And it's not easy, because they exploit our tendencies to be part of something, to be part of the interconnectedness of human beings. That's what they exploit. And they bring it together and put a binding. As I say, religion, if you look at the etymology of religion, it has to do with binding, something binding you. So they bring you together and bind you into a hive mind system of control, and they rule you forever, where you cannot reason. Remember, most preachers, popes, bishops, they don't encourage critical thinking. Think of your pastors. Just go and ask a really hardcore critical question. If you do it a couple of times, they will have problem with you. Why? Because you cannot control people who are spiritually enlightened. I'm not talking religious in dogmas. You cannot control people who are aware, whose sense of inner being has awakened. You can't control them. They can think for themselves. They are very aware. They understand history. So it's difficult to control them. And that is why they emphasize what? What does religion emphasize? Any part of religion you look at, right? Faith, not reason. Faith, not reason. Reason for religion has been demonized. Reason has been so demonized that if you reason, you're a devil. Something is wrong with you. You're supposed to put a blindfold on your eyes and just walk like a blind person and believe whatever garbage they teach you, right? Because that is the only one you can neutralize the neuronal capacity, the intellectual ability of man, and control him as a sheep. And as I said, the elite who rule the world, in fact, most of them, when you go deep into the history of religion, you know that the people who programmed religion on the planet are often on the dark side. On the dark side. Most of them are Luciferians, but that is another talk for another day. So I am going to share my screen, and we can, as always, take the conversation from there. This is going to be what we are looking at today. Adam and Eve, no evidence to support the Garden of Eden hypothesis. There's no evidence to that. No evidence There's no apology for me to say this. There's no evidence. If you do your homework in biblical theology, what annoys me is that most theologians understand this. I'm not talking of people who just go to maybe Sunday, drink some Sprite and Coke, and then they teach you minor biblical stories. Core theologians understand that many things written in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament are fabrications. So, but why do they keep promoting this to the people? They are afraid to teach the people the truth. Why? Because if you tell the people the truth, you don't have a job, right? And those theologians are often the lackeys of the higher elite. They are walking, their mouthpiece. That's the word I'm looking for. They are the mouthpiece of the higher elite who are often in the shadows, right? They make, they do the biddings for these higher, often Luciferian puppet masters. So that's why they cannot talk, right? Say, if you're a pastor and you reside in an established traditionalist religious congregation, right, or denomination, and you start going against the principles of those teachings, you are going to be called to order, right? If you're a Catholic priest or bishop or pope, you have an established dogma, right? And that dogmatic construct is where you reside. You're in a box. So if you think outside the box, you are done. You are done and you're condemned. In olden days, they will burn you on a stake, or they will perform some ritual and say you're going to hell. And that frightened the people a lot, right? Any system that uses fear to control people is a demonic system, it's an evil system. It's a human, imperfect system of the devil, of Lucifer to control people, right? Because we are souls in the body, and souls cannot be caged with religion. If you think your religion is it, I am in the right religion, you don't understand a thing. Because God is not confined within the doctrine of a particular religious system. God transcends time and space. And human beings have created, even God is not even his name, right? Because when you use these terminologies, what happens is that you confine God within the mentality of your narrow-mindedness, right? And that is why we have to be very careful when we use these terminologies. Oh, I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Pentecostal, or I am this and I'm that, because that puts you within the religious category. And that categorization becomes the limitedness to prevent you from real spiritual work, spiritual advancement, right? So, awakening means that your eyes is open and nobody deceives you. Nobody tricks you with an established dogmas and doctrines, right? So let's look at the Garden of Eden. And we have to understand people who wrote the Old Testament borrowed from different pre-existing theological backgrounds, right? They had this cultural contact with many cultures of the antiquities of ancient time, and they borrowed here, they borrowed there, and then utilized those information they obtained from different other cultures to construct their own unique theological narration, right? Let's take, for example, the story of Noah is a purely stolen story from the Sumerians. Fact. But if your mind is locked, you're not even going to look at it. But do your research. They stole the story of Noah in the Hebraic Torah word for word, literally stole it, because the Hebrew writers, the Hebrew culture came in contact with the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Akkadians in antiquities, we know that the Hebrew people went to exile in Babylon. Most of the things written in the Old Testament came out of that experience. In fact, they borrowed the Babylonian experience. The story of Noah is one of them, right? No, the story of Noah, the original came from Sumeria, and he's talking about the story of called the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of Atrahasis, where God was disturbed by the noise, if you like, by the sin of humanity. Humanity were making noise, and when they say noise, they're talking of sin, right? And the gods had a meeting, decided to go down and ask one man, maybe one righteous man, to build a boat and take all the animals into that boat, right? And he was saved from the deluge, from the flood. He came out, the rainbow, the birds or the pigeon um, or the raven coming out, trying to check if the water has dried. All these stories are there, plagiarized, stolen from another culture. So if it was God who inspired these so-called Hebraic to write writers, how did they steal it from another culture? That's the question, right? That's the question. That's why we cannot take these stories literally. Many people don't have the time to do the research, but when you do the research, I'm 100% sure that your construction of theological thinking will change. It will change. The reason many people believe the way they do is because they have not done the research. What you have done, you just sit down and the pastor or a priest or bishop or pope holler at you and holler and preach and preach and preach, and you believe those things. You believe them to be the actual word of God, right? So look at the term, the concept, the Garden of Eden is purely Sumerian language. It's not Hebraic. When you look at the etymology, the evolutionary etymology of that word came from the Sumerian language, Eridu. And we see that the morphological variations of this very word in different languages. In Sumeria, they have a garden where the gods Anunnaki came and involved in the act of creation. The same thing we saw in the Old Testament. So this original of this biblical story of Genesis was again taken from the Sumerians, not just from the Sumerians, but also from the Egyptians as well, stolen from there. Because the ancient Hebrews, the Hebrews in antiquity, we know for certain had contacts with these other pre-existing cultures. And these cultures are older than the Bible or the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people are not that old. When you look at the context of history and cultures and antiquity, right? They're not that old. So they were pre-existing other cultures from where they copied the tale or the story of creation and God involving in the human affairs as we have been handed down to. One of the reasons why, as I said, their story has become a global phenomenon is because, for example, in Egypt, the story of creation wasn't written out like that to the masses. It was kept in the temple because it has to be highly, you have to be in the known for them to initiate you into that knowledge. And that is part of the reason why many people don't understand those first stories from where the Hebrew writers plagiarize their own shit, right? So Eridu is a garden. It's from this word that you get the word Eden, right? From this Sumerian word, Eridu, the same concept, the same theological concept, a garden where the gods Anunnaki come down. The same thing in the Hebrew theology, the Garden of Eden. Eden is Eridu, where Jehovah or Elohim came down and involved in the physical act of creating man, the first human, Adam and Eve, which we're going to examine whether if that story is even true, because it's not true. So Eridu later becomes Eden, as in Garden of Eden. Now look at the morphological variations of this word, Sumerian word, or Eden in Hebrew, In German is, I don't speak these languages, so I'm trying to pronounce these words in English. In German is the same word, Eridu or Eden, that is ad. Please pardon me as I say I'm speaking this in English. I don't speak German or in Dutch or any other language. So, except English and my native language, of course. So, the same Eridu is what we find in German word ed. And in Dutch, the same thing, the same word. In Old English, the same word, oath. An Aramaic word, arata or eretz. In Gothic language, the same word, just different cultural linguistic variations, right? In Kurdish is etch. In Hebrew, eretz. The English word eth came from the Sumerian word eridu. So were they talking of a particular garden or were they talking of the entirety of the planet Earth? That is not our topic today, but it is a cause for a cognitive examination. I wrote an article sometime called Unifying Asian Cosmologies in order to understand light frequencies and the evolution of consciousness. Please, if you find this article, read it. But most of this research was also done by Zechariah Sitchin. So if you find the book by Zechariah Sitchin, read it, you will see some of this linguistic etymological evolution of word. So we established that the word Eden was not Hebraic, it was borrowed from the concept of the Sumerian garden, the beautiful garden that the gods Anunnaki, Enki, and the rest created, and where they are coming down from their abode in the heavens to indulge in whatever activities they want to indulge on the planet. So, religious creation mythos is only valid when we approach it from the position of inductive reasoning, affirming that humanity has a monogenic or polygenic origin. Thus, outside this, Genesis creation account cannot be substantiated in terms of historical evidence. The point I'm trying to make here is that the only way we can take Genesis creation of Adam and Eve serious is only when we look at it as maybe human beings have origin. You know, human beings must have originated from somewhere. It's only within that context that we can take this story serious. If we want to believe that there's a place called the Garden of Eden in the Middle East and God, that story, if you go detail by detail, does not make sense. There's no evidence to that. And we are going to show it as we go forward. So, what is the bottom line? If we go by the hypothesis of Western naturalists and paleontologists on the origin of man, we will conclude that the bipedal hominid species, which have been studied and interpreted as the ancestors of modern humans, are found in East Africa. That is the bomb I'm going to drop right now, right? That there was no creation of blah, blah, blah in the Garden of Eden because Africa, ancient Africa, Africa's prehistory has all evidence leaning to the fact that humanity originated from Africa, not in the Middle East. The Middle East is a baby, right? So Africa retains the archaeological and the genetic evidence. We're talking of science now. We're not talking of mythologies or your belief system. We're talking of evidence, fact, using gene, DNA, the code of DNA, decoding the DNA code provides a lot of evidence as to where humanity or how humanity originated. And when you study this very well, discover that there's no creation in the Garden of Eden, creating two white people, Adam and Eve. If you go to many Africans have these white people on a tree with serpent, this allegorical imagery in their homes, and they believe that the original man was white man and white woman. They believe that The mind is conquered. The mind is invaded. The fact is this. The fact is this. The fact they are hiding from you is this. And they don't want to know, they don't want you to know that the black man is the original on the planet. Before Europeans existed in Europe, there were black people. Prehistory in Europe, in Japan, original owners of Japan, the original inhabitants of that land, that island, black people. Go to China, the original inhabitants of that land are black people. Philippines, all over the planet, in North America, we see black people dominating the planet. But something happened along the way, and other races began to emerge. And that is something they don't want you to know. And that is part of why they're using these religious doctrines and books to colonize your mind, because they want to trap you in this cocoon of ignorance, right? Because they know when you wake up, you understand who you are and you can no longer be ruled over. The reason that you are being colonized, wherever you are found on the planet, you seem to be at the bottom, is because you don't know who you are. People have defined for you who you are. If you know who you are, people will not rule you. Now, if you don't know who you are, people will construct um people will construct a world with foreign psychology and make you live and survive within that psychology. And that is the mental illness that black people are suffering from. Wherever they exist, they tend not to live within their own psychological construct. They live with other foreign ideological construct, and that creates imbalance within your humanity. That is the point, right? So the so-called Genesis hypothesis is a hypothesis theory. So don't take it as if it is true. The Genesis story is like the story you tell children, like mythology you tell children. I know many people will be like thinking I'm out of my mind, but I know exactly what I'm saying. You're thinking like that because your neurons, your central nervous system has been wired with artificial program that has conquered you from the time you are a child. You never questioned. And I was like that too. I never questioned the doctrine that I was taught. Is that like when I was a child and I'm going to catechism? In the Catholic Church we call it the catechism. They're catechizing you. In Islamic religion, you call it like the Quranic school. That's where they brainwash you. You recite. They give you catchphrases, theological doctrines and dogmas, and you're just reciting. So you don't have the time to question. And even if you question, you get in trouble. You get in trouble by asking questions. So if you don't want to get in trouble, you keep your mouth zipped up and you listen. Doing that means that you are brainwashed. So you look at people in the Islamic world as if they are brainwashed. You don't know you're brainwashed as well, right? You've been washed. And the fact is that challenging religious indoctrination does not mean challenging spirituality. Spirituality is the original. That's the point. And that's what people don't get, because once you question, for example, the falsity of the creation account in Genesis, then something must be wrong with you. Then you must be an atheist. No, atheism does not stand. Atheism does not have any room as far as my humanity is concerned. But religiosity is what I want to get rid of. Bible, advanced consciousness, the mind elevated to higher realm, right? So the so-called Genesis hypothesis of a Middle East origin does not hold any evidence according to Western scientists or science themselves. So Western science themselves, the people who gave us Africans these religions, have been living those religions. Why? Because truth are coming out. Because, of course, the elites know that it is false. It is not true. The concepts and the ideas are not true. And most of the things we read in the Bible are astrotheologies, astromythologies, and we have not been taught how to read them. For example, the story of Samson and Delilah. People think these are concrete people that if you go back in history, you're going to see a man and a woman named um, Samson and Delilah. No, they are talking of astromythology. Samson is Shamash, the sun. See how people are fucked up. Delilah is the planet Venus. That's the ancient name for the planet Venus in ancient time. It is not people, folks. It is not people, because these writings are occulted, meaning they are hidden in secret to blind the ignorant people. It's the elite who understand all this. So the story of Samson and Delilah are astrological events. They are talking of astrological events, not people. But people read it and they think, if you go back thousands of years, there's a strong man called Samson and Delilah. And people begin to narrate all these stories thinking they know what the fuck they're talking about. No, they don't know what they're talking about. It's a program. They've been programmed to follow religion and not understand spirituality. Because when you understand spirituality, when you understand that when you hear the story of Samson and Delilah, you are looking at astrological event. You see, your consciousness changes, your perception changes, your mind is in a different dimension, in a different realm of spirituality. You understand it, right? You understand it. So let me not drift. Let's go forward. So Western scientists themselves are saying, oops, all these things we thought people around the world, oh crap, they're not true. They're not true. So the geographical arena of prehistory is Africa, and there is an abundance fossil evidence to substantiate this claim. The geographical arena of the human origin is found in Africa, not in the Middle East, folks. And if you're an African, you believe the Middle East origin of man, you're dumb. Dumb would be. You're dumb, right? You're dumb. You've been colonized. You've been brainwashed. Humanity did not originate in Israel. That's it. That's it. People have colonized your mind. People have brainwashed you. That tells us the reason why you were where you are, because people who are smarter in head, people who are more intelligent, have utilized religious mental conquest and have killed your mind. And that is why Africa is the way Africa is, because Africa does not understand herself. So moving forward, species and center of origin. We are trying to utilize the Western science themselves. We Africans are not the one who put in all this science. They are the one who gave us religion. They're the one also who are using these sciences to discredit themselves. They're doing our work for us. And that's an addition. I love that. When their own scientific establishment, their own scientific traditions are discrediting their racial and theological beliefs and teachings. Oh, I love that. I love that. A Russian scientist conducted a research in botany. Botany, is it botany? How you call it? It's plants and, yeah, I don't know. So conducted a research in which many scholars, even of European origin, are utilizing this to establish the authenticity of the fact that humanity originated from Africa. And this hypothesis, this hypothesis is called the center of origin hypothesis, right? This guy's name is Nikolai Vavilov, a Russian, a renowned Soviet Russian agronomist, botanist, geneticist, best known for having identified the center of origin of cultivated plants. He postulated that a given plant species from a given geographical area, that is the center of origin, is characterized by increase within species diversity. This means that species contain the most genetic diversities relative to the original varieties from their center of origin. Let me just explain this briefly. These guys conducted some, during the even back in the Cold War, Soviet Russia has had some of the best scientists, right? So this guy was involved in studying botany. Is it botany? Botany, whatever. So, and he came to a conclusion through his extensive research that, say, for example, if beans or corn, let's say corn, originated in, say, Mexico, let's say, hypothetically, corn or maize originated, say, in Kenya, maybe Nairobi, Kenya, that he called that region the center of origin. And he said that due to evolutionary process, there will tend to be within species variations, differentiations of that particular species, right? Within that geographical location of origin. But now, if that particular maize, say, that coming out of Kenya, begin to migrate to other places, it loses that in species diversity, right? And the point is that we have also utilized this very scientific fact to indicate that Africa contains the most in species, within species, human diversity on the planet. Therefore, make your own conclusion. Know where I'm going to. Therefore, Africa is the center of the origin of humanity, not the Middle East, not Israel. Don't believe that facade. They're lying to you. They're lying to you because you don't know what you don't know. So, in Africa, you see all varieties of physiological appearance, right? The center of origin has been extended to the animal kingdom in general, as well as to the human origin. We utilized the Russian agronomists' findings to apply to the realm of humanity, and that is applicable as well. It provides a scientific explanation to the diversity found among Africans because all over the planet, Africa contains within species diversity. There are more human variation, diverse human biological expressions in Africa than you get anywhere on the planet. Therefore, the scientists, not African, because if African do it now, they say, "Oh, you're just being Afrocentric." You are just being Afrocentric. That's the allegation they label to Africans. But they don't tell you that when the whole world is, when they propose their own theory, it is universal science. When you do your own, it is Afrocentric, right? When the Europeans, Anglo-European establishment carry out research on medicine, it is medicine, like universal medicine. When you practice this medicine as you understand it in your own culture, maybe if you are from the East, maybe China, from Africa, it becomes Eastern medicine or Afrocentric medicine, not medicine. That is what you call bully. That is what you call intellectual thuggery. The thuggery, the thugs to you guys, and they control. That's what control is. They control the narrative and they define what, quote unquote, scientific is. So going forward, Africa contains the most within species diversity. Therefore, following this established scientific methodology, Africa is the Africa is a place where humanity originated. So again, argument from linguistic point of view, language. Africa again has the most diverse linguistic collection on the planet. Africa has, right? So there's a research done by this doctor, Quentin Atkinson, He's a psychology professor at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. He conducted a groundbreaking research in linguistic evolution. He was able to scientifically study and analyze sounds of various languages around the world. He detected signals that point to Africa as the genesis of human language. These are European top elite scientists saying this, not crazy Afrocentric people. But he found phonemes, that is, consonants, vowels, and tones which make up languages. This led him to conclude that all human languages originated from Africa, Southern Africa to be precise. Some African language contain more than 100 phonemes. Compare that to English language, which only has 45 phonemes. Dr. Atkinson also indicated that the farther away humans disperse from Africa, the less their language carry phoneme. What does it mean? That even language speaking word, Africa came from Africa. In other words, Africa taught humanity how to talk. How to talk. Evidence from the physical, evidence of African origin from physical diversity. Again, when you talk of physiological differentiation or diversity, Africa still has the most physical diversity of any group of people on the planet, on any continent. So, and scientists are also concluding that this is also pinpointing to the fact that Africa is the center of origin of humanity, not in the Middle East. I keep saying it, not in the Middle. Though God did not create first man called Adam or whatever the hell that name is in the Middle East. So when you begin to believe that, you know your mind is conquered. Sub-Saharan Africa has the most physical diverse humans on the planet. The Nilotic speakers are the tallest tribe in Africa. The Nilotic people are indigenous to the Nile Valley. They speak Nilotic language. They are predominantly found in Ethiopia, Southern Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Tanzania. So these regions carry genetically the tallest people on the planet when you compare statistically group by group, right? Again, the Khoisans of Southern Africa are among the shortest in the world. So Africa has these genetic variations, diversities, the tallest and the shortest. And we're not even talking of the, what do you call these short people again in Africa, find someone in Congo, the pygmies. The pygmies are also in Africa. So every other humanity is between, in terms of physical characteristics, can be deduced from these two group of people in Africa. Khoisans and Nilotic human types produce the highest physical diversities in the world. Every other human type is in between. The Khoisans are the shortest and very fair skin. The Nilotic are very dark and extremely pigmented like their dark skin. You see, this beautiful woman, it's pretty dark. You see, it's as dark as it gets, highly pigmented. Both of these types are found in sub-Saharan Africa. Every observable physical trait in sub-Saharan Africa could be explained by these two types, right? The Khoisans are kind of miniature, short, and then you go to these Nilotic regions, you see these giant, tall people with dark skin. The Khoisans are fair skin, right? The Khoisans have certain phenotypical characteristics that could be described as Asian type. For example, epicanthic fold and facial flatness. If you look at these three top, the top three people here, they look Asian. if this woman, these people are working somewhere in China or in any Asian, you don't think they are Asian, but they are Africans, right? The bottom uh, third, the three at the bottom are Asians, right? But look at them very well. You see what they call the epicanthic fold. This the way they eye is what they call the epicanthic fold, and the facial flatness. You see that physiognomic facial flatness. In these groups, they all look alike, but these are Africans and these are Asians. What is telling you that the people you call Asians were probably just a genetic variations of Africans who migrated to Asians, the place you call Asian, and probably have some evolutionary changes over thousands of years, right? So again, the meat, the gold of all this research is on genetics. Genetics is the finality of science when you begin to decode the origin of human being because it is precise, right? Uh, Archaeologists, paleontologists can do research and those are valid. But when you talk to gene, talking about gene, this is a new molecular biological science that is changing the world, and molecular biology, by the way of genetics, has proven that Africa is the home. Humanity originated from Africa, right? The science of mitochondria DNA has provided substantial insight as to which human population first appeared on Earth. Scientists have established that the oldest female on Earth is traced to sub-Saharan Africa. This is what they call the mitochondria Eve. So when you talk of Eve, as in Adam and Eve, the first Eve is an African. In essence, the black woman is the first on the planet when you talk to giving birth to people, right? We don't even go to the story of man being created first and other men to colonization. Man cannot be created first, but we're not going to, maybe sometime in the future we can talk about that. Another how the perverted reality, and that is why it's Luciferian. That's why it's satanic. The construct, the religious construct in which we've given is inverted. Their goal is to invert reality, something that is, they turn things upside down. They told you that man was created first. You cannot come before your mama. It's impossible. So that is erroneous teaching. The human deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, carries genetic information inherited from our ancestors. DNA is found within the nucleus of a cell. This is called nuclear DNA. Nuclear DNA is carried and transmitted by both parents. The 22nd sets of DNA are called autosomal DNA. The 23rd DNA pairs is called, is XX in female and XY in male. So chromosomal DNA is also called the sex DNA because it determines the sex of a child. Y chromosome is only transmitted by male, right? So male transmits Y DNA, but when it comes to chromosomal DNA, it is female that transmits those. And that is what they have studied, the chromosomal DNA, and find out that the original woman on the planet is a black woman in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, right? The origin of humanity. When you look for archaeological, paleontological, geographical, historical, prehistory, you look for these informations in sub-Saharan Africa because it is like the maker of paleontology. If you are a paleontologist and haven't studied anything coming from Africa, then I wonder what you've studied, right? I don't believe in the monkey, humans evolve from monkey kind of Darwinist theory. But even if we go by this archaeological naturalist point of view, you see that Africa still retain the largest prehistorical ground for these fossil studies and evidence, right? DNA are also found in small capsules called mitochondria. We talked about that. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited from the mother. So there are two theories as to the origin of man. One is called the monogenic evolutionary theory, and then the polygenic. Mono means one. One genetic means humanity has is descent from one single root, right? And people who believe in this believe that that single root is traced scientifically to Africa, not in the Middle East. Forget about this bullshit. Human being did not first originate in the Garden of Eden in the Middle East, right? So, monogenetic evolutionary theory concludes that human descent is traceable to a single ancestral source in Africa. It, it posits, not positive, it posits that, I don't know what I'm writing here. Research has been conducted on genetic sciences and provided enough evidence to support the monogenetic theory, right? How about polygenesis? Poly means many. Many um, the people who believe in this theory believe that humans originated from different continents, from different at different times, right? Polygenesis, on the other hand, asserts that humanity originated from different continents at different times and from different sources. But there are some, again, Europeans who are disproving this claim of polygenesis. They are saying that polygenetic theory is error. And one of them is a Professor Alf Geyensten of the Department of Immunology, Genetics, and Pathology in Uppsala University in Sweden. He disproves the polygenesis theory. Let's see, there was an article in the Nature that came out some time ago where they explained this doctor's findings. And I'm going to read it. Archaeologists are still not sure when and where modern humans first appeared. Some believe that Homo sapiens evolved independently in several places around the globe. That is polygenesis, a polygenetic theory. But research revealed in this week's Nature leads support to the idea that we appeared in one location in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, monogenetic, monogenesis in Africa, and spread there, replacing Neanderthals and other early humans as we went. Research led by Alf Geyensten of the University of Uppsala in Sweden have found evidence that we are all descended from a single ancestral group that lived in Africa about 170,000 years ago. And they suggest that modern humans spread across globe from Africa in an exodus and took place only around 50,000 years ago. Geyensten's theme didn't scrutinize, this is very important. They didn't scrutinize fossils to come up with this result. Instead, the group examined DNA from living people around the world. DNA is the gold mine when it comes to research in the human origin. This is kind of long reading. Be patient. The genetic material in our chromosome is a combination of genes from our parents, but each cell also contains structures called mitochondria, and these house DNA and is independent of that found in chromosomes. Mitochondrial DNA gives researchers a window into history because it is only transmitted along the female line. There is no mixing between generations, and the DNA sequence only changes as a result of random mutations or copying error. If these mutations appear at a fairly constant rate, then comparing the mitochondrial DNA of two populations reveals roughly when they had a common ancestor. This approach is not new, but in the past, researchers have concentrated on only 7% of the total mitochondrial DNA sequence, known as the control region. The mutation rate for these regions might be different from the rest of the sequence. So, Gayaston and co-workers sequenced the entire mitochondrial DNA of 53 people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. They concluded any parts of the DNA that mutated usually quickly, then, sorry, they concluded any parts of the DNA that mutated usually quickly, then compared the data to produce a sort of human family tree. They discovered that the most recent common ancestors of everyone in the sample group live in Africa 171,500 to 50,000 years ago. They also found significant branch in the tree that separate most Africans from non-Africans. This genetic divide probably represent an exodus of people from Africa that took place 52,000 to 27,500 years ago. The evidence favoring the recent African origin theory of human evolution is compelling, but the researchers hope for better data in the future. Mitochondrial DNA is only one locus and only reflects the genetic history of females. They write, with the Human Genome Project nearing fruition, the ease by which such data may be generated will increase, providing us with an ever more detailed understanding of the human history. This is what Professor Dr. Gayaston and his research team came to conclude. The top Anglo-European elite institution coming with this theory that Africa, if you look at genetic information, is the home of humanity, not in the Middle East. Why do they keep teaching this bullshit? Why don't they teach the truth in the churches and the schools? Why not? Because they don't want you to know. They want you to follow the traditionalist false narrative. What does that do to your consciousness? It deprives you of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge. Who are you? If you don't understand who you are, you will think that other people are better than you. Right? You were on the planet millions of years before this other group start coming. How come you think that other peoples are the chosen race? God chose them. God chose them. But you were created first, right? God chose them. You know what choosing means? If you are created first, it means that the frequency of God's mind decided you first. We don't get it. The emanation, the principal thought, God is the God is disincarnate. And the first frequency that emitted from his mind is you. You are in God's frequency, God's thought at the beginning of creation. You are the first. You see how they corrupt everything inverted. Now you're praying and you think that other people were chosen race first. You've been conned. Africans. Africa carries the highest genetic diversity in comparison to European and Asian human populations. Genetic research has provided sufficient reason to affirm that Africa is the birthplace for modern humans. That is, the maternal lineage of humanity is traced to sub-Saharan Africa. Polygenesis is in the same line of reasoning with multi-regional hypothesis. Polygenesis is also kind of another version of something called a multi-regional hypothesis. And this hypothesis is credited to an Australian fossil researcher called Milford Wolpath. A multi-regional hypothesis has been challenged as lacking in evidence. Let's see what what those supporting evidence that challenges multi-regional hypotheses, what they are. The multi-regional hypothesis model of human evolution, abbreviated MRE, and known alternatively as regional continuity or polycentric model, argues that our earliest hominid ancestors, specifically Homo erectus, evolved in Africa and then radiated out into the world. Humans, by the way of Homo erectus, I don't believe in Charles Darwin's evolution, but let's use their own um, um, research findings and conclusions. So, based on paleontological data rather than genetic evidence. So, what this guy is trying to disprove is trying to disprove the multi-regional hypothesis or polygenic hypothesis by saying that it is only based on paleontological data and not genetic. These are like old things because the new science now, we're talking of genetic studies, genetic science. And using, okay, let's read on. The theory says that after Homo erectus arrived in the various regions in the world hundreds of thousands of years ago, they slowly evolved into modern humans. Charles Darwin. Homo sapiens, modern human, Homo sapiens, so multi-regional hypothesis posits evolved from several different groups of Homo erectus in several places throughout the world. So multi-regional hypothesis is saying that all over the world, groups of hominids, specimen, a group of hominids, Homo erectus, existed in different continents at different times and evolved each separately, independent of each other. However, genetic and paleontological evidence gathered since the 1980s has shown conclusively that that simply cannot be the case. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa and dispersed out into the world somewhere between 50,000 to 62,000 years ago. What happened then is quite interesting, right? So the argument against multi-regional hypotheses is again coming down to genetic evidence. Genetic evidence will shut everybody's mouth down because gene is very important, and that's why they are targeting your gene. Most of the things are happening in the world today. They want to destroy your gene, your genetic lineage. You know, your DNA is the book of life. You see, when people die, you see that we are told that the angel will open the book of life. What is the book of life? Your gene, your DNA will be opened because the information contained in your DNA dating thousands of years. One single tiny DNA will carry maybe information, maybe the entire library of Congress. One tiny, just one. Could you imagine the amount of information that you're carrying, but you can't even access them because you've been shut off from some of these knowledge. So I'm going to read this highlighted area. The predominant theory then was that there were nearly independent origin of modern humans within the various regions of the world out of Homo erectus and or one of these various regional archaic humans. Don't kid yourself. Say don't kid yourself. Don't be deceived. That original headline theory was never really tenable. Modern humans are simply too much alike to be evolved from different Homo erectus groups, but more reasonable models, such as those put forward by paleontologist Wilford H. Wolpaff and his colleagues, argue that you could account for the similarities in human beings on our planet because there was lots of gene flows between these independently evolved group. So, Wolpaff, or whatever his name, paleontologist, was trying to argue the case for multi-regional hypothesis that different Homo erectus from different regions of the world evolve into human being. As I said, I don't believe in monkey, that people evolve from monkey. Maybe it's talking about some people. Africans are very regional, right? But we're not going to talk about that today. So he's arguing that you can account for similarity in humanity because there were interchange, genetic interchange, biological interchange between these different groups that could explain why people are similar. So let's read this. The differences were stark and testable. If multi-regional hypothesis was right, there will be various levels of Asian genetic alleles found in whatever, found in modern people in scattered regions of the world and the transitional fossil forms and levels of morphological continuity. If RAO was right, then there would be very few alleles older than the origin of anatomically modern humans in Eurasia and a decrease in genetic diversity as you get away from Africa. Between the 1980s and today, over 18,000 whole human mitochondrial DNA genomes have been published from people all over the world, and they all coalesce within the last 200 years, and all the non-African lineage only 50,000 to 60,000 years ago or younger. Any hominin lineage that branched off from the modern human species prior to 2,000 years ago did not leave any mitochondria, DNA, mitochondria in modern human. Again, what all this blabbing is saying is that Africa genetic. When you look at the mitochondrial DNA, is the oldest on the planet. The rest are like yesterday. So where did they come from? Where did all these other races come from? And that is very important. We cannot just say, oh, God created everybody. That's because evidence does not support. We have to know what the fuck is going on, right? Okay. Today, paleontologists are convinced that humans evolved in Africa and that the bulk of modern non-African diversity is recently derived from the African source. That's what they're saying, that the rest of mankind came out of Africa. Africa gave birth to humanity, right? The exact timing and pathways outside of Africa are still under debate, perhaps out of East Africa, perhaps along with a southern route from South Africa. Between 1 to 4% of genomes in people who are non-Africans are derived from Neanderthal. This is not Afrocentric people writing. This is not Afrocentric people writing. You have to pay attention to what they're saying because they're hiding some of these things from you guys. Neanderthal is sort of a hominid, like sort of advanced monkey, right? Ape. I say that non-Africans between 1 to 4% carry the gene. How did the gene of a monkey enter people, non-Africans? We have to explain this, buddy. We have to explain that. So, in other words, the African humanity is the purest, right? The purest. How did monkey gene enter other non-Africans? We have to understand that. We have to study this, right? So does it mean they're not purely human? This is not it has nothing to do like maybe racism. I'm just stating the fact of science that non-Africans, 1 to 4% of their genome carry Neanderthal, Neanderthalis, Neanderthal, right? That is an eye-opening. And this research is being done by top elite scholars and institutions. Neither Neanderthals or Denisovans survive into the modern period, except as a handful of genes, perhaps because they were unable to adapt to the unstable climate in the world or competition with the Homo sapiens. Neanderthal, they're telling you Neanderthal did not survive except in a handful of genes in people. people that are non-Africans. In other words, non-African people have certain uh, DNA in them that is monkey. I didn't say that. That's what research is saying. That's what research is saying. So, how come people have, are there different creations on this planet? And that's what something we might talk about in the future. The pre-Adamic race and the Adamic race. The pre-Adamic race and the Adamic race. We have to talk about this sometime in the future because these are some of the things they're hiding from people, right? Europeans are not that old on this planet. And that's the point. People who have told you that God created them first and chose them were not even that old. They're a few thousand years old. And there's evidence, again, going by genetics. There's an article written on the National Geographic. Modern Europeans' genetic history starts in Stone Age. They're new on this planet. So Black people or Negroid has been populating this planet for thousands of years, millions, not thousands of years, before these other people came on the scene like yesterday, and they hand you a book and telling you that God created us first. And you have to listen to us. We have to teach you about God. No, we know about him first. We know about him first. But our knowledge has been blinded. We've been eliminated from the source. As I said, if you are the first thought, you have to understand metaphysics to see what I'm talking about. You are the first frequency emission from the creator. God thought about you first when he talks about creating the material universe. You are the first that emitted out of this divine frequency. And you existing here for millions of years, and people come maybe 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, and they told you that we are the first, and God created us, Adam and Eve first, and you are buying the theology. You see, you are dragged down to low vibration. That's why you cannot progress. It's something they're hiding. Their Masonic lodges and their secret societies. That is the gem they're hiding. You are here on the planet thousands of years. So Europeans as a people are younger than we thought. Oops. Okay. They are the ones saying that. If an African say that, they say Afrocentric craziness, right? A new study suggests, listen, DNA recovered from ancient skeletons reveals that the genetic makeup of modern Europe was established around 4,500 BC. That's new. The context of the entirety of history on the planet is like yesterday. Not even yesterday, maybe just a few minutes ago. That's when their genetic was studied to have been to emerge on the planet, right? In the mid Neolithic or 6,500 years ago, and not by the first farmers who arrived in the area around 7,500 years ago by early hunter-gatherer. So they are saying that even before that, around 4,500 years ago, the gene, the DNA of modern Europeans became known, right? So, but before then, there were even people who were living there in Europe. As I told you, that Black people populated the planet in Europe. The place you call Greek now used to be the Pelasgians. They were not Europeans. But now you see Greek people have multiplied that when you talk of Greek, you talk of the Indo-Europeans, right? But they were the Pelasgians. In Europe, you have the Aurignacian culture developed by the people you might consider as the Khoisan people. They were there thousands of years before the modern Europeans. In Japan, Black people existed there. In China, Black people existed there. In North America, before the so-called Columbus came, Black people were there all over the planet. But something happened, and these people, maybe they're extinct, maybe they died up. Something happened. And that's what researchers, especially if you're Africans, particularly Africans, we're tired of a lot of Africans just saying, I have a PhD degree. We cannot do research. Why do you get a piece of worthless trash document or paper or certificate to just claim you have PhD? if you cannot research and liberate the people's mind from this kind of colonization, stop getting PhD. Go and find you a job, maybe sweeping gutter, because you can't do research. Most African scholars, it's just a title. Nobody cares about title. You do research, right? That's why you have PhD. So this study was done again by the elite Anglo-European Anglo-European establishment, the institutions. The Australia Center for the Study of Asian DNA is the one who conducted this research, saying that, oops, modern European humanity, their gene is new on the planet, 4,500 BC, maybe about 6,000 years ago. So before then, where did they came from? The surprising findings are part of a new study published in this week's, there's no need to read this. Okay. In the study, Cooper, let's go back. Cooper is the one who conducted some of this study. I'm going to show you the name in case you want to do more research. Go back. Alan Cooper is the one who was working, who works in this Australian Center for the Study of Asian DNA. Alan Cooper and his group, right? In the study, Cooper and his colleagues extracted mitochondrial DNA which children inherit only from their mother, and the teeth and the bones of 39 skeletons found in central Germany. The skeletons ranged in age from about 7,500 to 2,500 years ago. The team focused on a group of closely related mitochondrial lineages, mutations in mitochondrial DNA that are similar to one another, known as haplotype H, which is carried up to 45% of Europeans. The first humans to reach Europe arrived from Africa. Again, they tell you that first humans who migrated into Europe were Africans, right? 35,000 to 40,000 years ago. By about 30,000 years ago, they were widespread throughout the area while their close cousins, the Neanderthals, disappeared. Hardly any of these early hunter-gatherer carried the H haplotype in their DNA. So this H haplotype, or haplotype H, or whatever, was not found in the original people who lived in Europe before these modern Europeans emerged. So how did they get this haplotype? I don't know. And again, I'm also asking, how did they have the Neanderthal DNA, the monkey DNA in their gene? We cannot ignore this truth. We cannot ignore these findings. We cannot ignore that. What happened? What happened, right? About 7,500 years ago, during the early Neolithic period, another wave of humans expanded into Europe, this time from the Middle East. And even when they say Middle East, we have to understand that they migrated from Africa up north and then across to Europe. They carried in their genes a variant of H haplotype and in their minds knowledge of how to grow and raise crops. Egypt's earliest farming village found in Europe. Egypt is Africa, and Egyptians told you where they came from in the papyrus of Honefa. They tell you, we came from the foothill of the mountains of the moon, where the god Happy lives. And where are they talking about? Egyptians told you they came from East Africa and developed civilization along the Nile, right? Although later on, Egypt was split into the lower Egypt, which is the southern part, and the upper Egypt. I mean, the lower between the lower Egypt and the upper Egypt. And we know that the Egyptians on the northern side became later on invaded by the Indo-Europeans who later on conquered the entire Egypt and destroyed the civilization from within because they ate it like canker worm from within. So we have come to the end of this slide. And the bottom line is that when we read some of these documents, theological documents, religious documents, dogmatic documents, we have to understand that they are not factuality of history. We have to understand that we have been brainwashed, that people who gave us this document corrupted it. They corrupted it as a method of brainwashing us into imbibing and embracing a historical narrative that are often antithetical to our existence. And how do you change that? How do you change that frequency of mind control? Religion is the tool of mind control because once they codify that theology into a book and you become catechized, you become indoctrinated. As I said, from childhood, it means that your central nervous system, this is deep shit, your neurological construct, makeup is invaded by an external ideology. And you're talking of thought forms of spirituality. A thought form has invaded you and possessed your mind, and you can no longer reason. And because you can no longer reason, you dominated. Something is ruling you, and something is controlling you. And the people tell you that this right here is a definition of God, and you buy it. And the people who are teaching you about God has not been on the planet for more than 7,000 years ago. And you have been here for millions of years ago, for millions of years. And people who are born or came on the scene yesterday told you that God has chosen them, that they are the first frequency of the emanation of the mind of God. And you believe that. You see how you are fucked. Africa is in a state of mental derangement, and people have to wake up from that ideology, from that foreign ideology. If you look at African continent, you see a continent split into two by foreign ideologies. Islamism coming from the Arabia, as well as Christianity coming from the imperial Western society. These two ideologies has colonized the minds of the Africans and rendered them incapable of thinking. So when are you going to wake up?